Hello and welcome to episode number 204, where I'm speaking with Leonard Perlmutter about his new book titled Your Conscience, the key to unlock limitless wisdom and creativity and solve all of life's challenges. We discuss how our perceptions are skewed by our conceptions. We talk about the limited perspective of the ego, how we can drain our creative energy chasing rainbows. And Leonard gives us lots of tools for purifying our conscience. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. I will also discuss topics like yoga, which is the sister science of Ayurveda, and various topics under the umbrella of holistic health and planetary health, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature and to Mother Nature. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening, and now here's a new episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Leonard Perlmutter to the podcast. He is the founder and director of the American Meditation Institute in Averill Park, New York, and is the originator of National Conscience Month. He studied in Rishikesh, India, under Swami Rama of the Himalayas, whose lab studies at the Menninger Institute demonstrated that blood pressure, heart rate, and the autonomic nervous system can be voluntarily controlled. Leonard has presented informative yoga science and meditation workshops at many well-respected medical, Ayurveda, and yoga institutions, and has served on the faculties of the New England Institute of Ayurvedic Medicine and the International Himalayan Yoga Teachers Association. He is the author and editor of Transformation, the Journal of Yoga Science as Holistic Mind-Body Medicine, and his Heart and Science of Yoga course curriculum has been certified by the Albany Medical College, the American Medical Association, and the American Nurses Association for continuing medical education credit. Today, we're going to talk about Leonard's new book, Your Conscience, the key to unlock limitless wisdom and creativity and solve all of life's challenges. Leonard, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Colette.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. And I really enjoy this book, Leonard. And as I was saying to you before I hit the record button, it's something that's needed now today more than ever.
I feel that that's true. I was in a situation when COVID arrived where I was in quarantine. And I started asking myself, how am I to be of service since students don't regularly come for classes at the time? And I thought that the perfect gift would be to provide people an important tool, perhaps the most important tool that they could use regularly every day to make conscious, discriminating choices that would help them deal with all the pain and uncertainty of our modern time. And what I decided was Your Conscience would be the best gift.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful gift for our time. And you break it down so well in the book. And in fact, in your introduction, you have a quote from Albert Einstein saying a problem cannot be solved on the level at which it appears. It must be solved on a higher level. Can you explain a bit about this quote, please, and particularly why it's relevant today? We already touched on this, these challenging times we're living in.
Well, that Einstein quote was very important to me. It was a game changer because I realized that which we perceive is skewed by that which we conceive. Mm-hmm. So our perceptions are skewed by our conceptions, these unconscious forces that motivate us to think, speak, and act in certain ways. And the real challenge for every human being is that so many of our unconscious concepts that skew our perceptions of reality are faulty. And because they're faulty, they ultimately bring about pain when we use them. And we all have them. And where do we get them? Well, gosh, we got some from mom, and we got some from dad. We got some from grandmother and grandfather and siblings and friends and teachers and politicians and celebrities. But the problem is that they are now stored in our unconscious mind, and it has turned into the software of our own mind. And don't you know that unconscious forces are 1,000,000 times more powerful than good intentions?
Wow.
So it's a challenge.
Yes, and indeed it is a challenge, but I think awareness is the catalyst to change, right?
Yes, if we can change our perspective to a higher perspective, in other words, if we have the opportunity to look at our relationships that we have every day that appear to be so stressful, if we could observe them, say, from the far side of the moon, well, they might not seem so significant, so overwhelming. But we are not observing it from a higher perspective because nobody taught us what that higher perspective is.
Right.
And what's so interesting for each of us is every human being has a conscience. And the conscience, when used appropriately, and we can discuss this as the conversation proceeds, but the conscience has the capacity to reflect perfect wisdom from the intuitive library of wisdom at the core of our being. In other words, the conscience can reflect perfect wisdom from the super conscious portion of the mind, the same portion of the mind where Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations and Paul McCartney can hear beautiful melodies. It doesn't mean that any of us is necessarily going to become a songwriter or a physicist. But what it does mean is that if you and I can regularly use our conscience as our guide, we will know what's to be done and we will know what's not to be done.
Right. Yeah. So I'd love to start, Leonard, with explaining to people, like breaking down what is our conscience.
Well, it seems to me, from my own personal experience, that each of us has intuitively thought from even the youngest of ages that we have different voices in our mind. As it turns out, it's true. And the conscience is a voice that's, again, in my experience, it's a little quiet. It sort of speaks in whispers. But the important thing to remember about the conscience is it is the only function of the mind, and there are 4 of them. It is the only function of the mind that can discriminate, determine, judge, and decide. Oh, when I learned that, my eyes were wide open, because what it meant was that every single choice we have ever made and every single choice we will make in the future has been and always will be made by the conscience. the other three functions of the mind that we will talk about, ego, senses, and unconscious mind, they can only make recommendations. They can only give us advice from limited perspective. So the conscience is extremely important because it tells us what's to be done and what's not to be done. And when we listen to the conscience and when we apply its wisdom, we know how we feel, and we also know how we feel when we don't use the wisdom reflected by the conscience.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And just to repeat that again, so you said the conscience is the only function of the mind with the power to discriminate, determine, judge, and decide.
That is absolutely correct.
That's fascinating. And you mentioned there the four functions of the mind. I think it'd be great to go into that discussion now, and how they help in making decisions, but they're not the determining factor.
That's right. They do help, and sometimes they don't help.
That's true.
So the first of these is the ego. Now, the ego is interesting because the ego appears to be hardwired to the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain, every human being has that portion of the brain, the reptilian brain. And it's interesting because, like the reptilian brain, the ego is heavily invested in self-preservation. And because the ego and the reptilian brain alike are so heavily invested in self-preservation, both suffer from the intense fear of annihilation.
Right.
The fear that they might be no more. And so because of that, the ego, in the midst of every relationship, divides the components of that relationship up in two distinct categories. So the ego would say, oh, this portion is pleasant. I like it. I'm going to work my very best to reprise it. And then the ego says, oh, but this is unpleasant. It's bad, not good. And I want to avoid it at all costs. So that sets up a problem for us as human beings, because the more we become addicted to our likes and dislikes, only go after what is pleasant and avoid what is painful, the mind becomes very inflexible. Right. And because there's inflexibility in the mind, likewise, the body becomes inflexible. And an inflexible body and an inflexible mind always means pain and dis-ease. And if we don't heed the lesson of pain at a low decibel level, the decibel level simply gets louder and louder until our stress and dis-ease transitions into a full-blown disease. So I have to mention, to credit the ego is not always wrong.
Right.
Right now, I need a healthy ego. Colette, you need a healthy ego to have this kind of conversation and make sense. If we want to drive an automobile or a truck, we need a healthy ego. The problem is the ego only has a limited perspective, and it's often wrong. However, it's never in doubt. And in its role as advisor, unlike the conscience, which speaks in whispers, the ego, because it fears annihilation, is loud and pushy and insistent.
Okay.
So that's the ego. Then we have the senses. Now the senses, you know the senses of sight and smell and taste and hearing and touch, both from the hands and the feet. They use our creative energy. In other words, the mind projects our creative energy all the time through our eyes, our nostrils, our mouth, our ears, our hands, and our feet, so that we can explore the world, looking for objects, looking for relationships that I think will make me happy, that I think will make me secure. And so the truth is, if we're honest with ourselves, we waste a tremendous amount of creative energy running after rainbows that either never appear or don't really provide us the happiness, the long-lasting happiness and security that we're really looking for. And that is a major challenge for us. And once that creative energy is extruded through the senses, we can't get it back any more than we can put toothpaste back in a tube once we squeeze it. So we need a lot of creative energy to fulfill the purpose of life.
Right.
How are we going to do that when we're wasting so much of our creative energy chasing rainbows?
It's a drain on our creativity.
That's right. And our energy. Our energy. It's a little bit like, I'm a gardener, so I've used what they refer to in gardening as a soaker hose. It looks like a hose. It's a regular hose, but it has lots of little holes in it. And you set that up along your vegetable patch or with flowers, a certain distance, maybe 25 feet, 50 feet. And when you turn the water on, the water goes dribbling out of these little holes, watering all of the plants, flowers, and vegetables. But at the far end of the hose, there's very little pressure. But we need a lot of pressure at that far end. We need a lot of creative energy. But if I'm dribbling in an analogous way, all of my creative energy, like the soaker hose, is dribbling the water, then I'm not going to be adequate to deal with relationships and my life. But if I took some tape and I taped up those holes of the soaker hose, at the far end of the hose, there would be a mighty stream of water. And similarly, if we could learn to examine our desires and parent our senses so that they don't constantly go to the hardware store for milk, look for sensual gratifications where none is to be found. Then we can save some of our creative energy to fulfill the purpose of our lives.
Absolutely.
So those are two of the other functions of the mind. We have the ego and the senses, and of course the unconscious mind is the third. And this is the repository of all of our habits, our merits, our demerits. In other words, it's everything that we deem essential to self-preservation. Of our memories. Some are pleasant, some are not so pleasant, and all of our imaginations. They're all stored in our unconscious mind. And as I mentioned earlier, unconscious forces are 1,000,000 times more powerful than good intention. So we have the ego, we have the senses, we have the unconscious mind. All three are advisors, but they only have limited perspectives. Sometimes they are appropriate. Sometimes, a lot of times, not so helpful. So the ego, senses, and unconscious mind are very loud and very pushy. And it creates quite a disturbance in our mind. And that disturbance very often, most often, overwhelms the capacity of the conscience to reflect perfect wisdom from the super conscious portion of the mind. So instead of being able to reflect that perfect wisdom, the conscience generally just rubber stamps the loudest voice it can hear. And so it rubber stamps the limited perspective, often faulty, of the ego, senses, and unconscious mind. So basically, that anarchy in the mind disallows the conscience to operate to its fullest capacity and suffer as a result.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And you mentioned earlier that which we perceive by our conceptions are faulty. And these are through life experiences, you said through relationships, and have they become our way of being. But they will also, those unconscious conceptions will impact our day-to-day choices, you mentioned in the book. What we eat, what we listen to. Mm-hmm.
That's right. There's a lovely teaching story about 3 baseball umpires. Baseball is a very popular game in the United States, in the East and in South America. And so they were having dinner, these 3 umpires, and they were talking shop, talking about what constitutes a ball and what constitutes a strike. And the first umpire, who is a rookie, says, I call them as I see them. And the second umpire, who has been calling balls and strikes in baseball games for over 10 years, says, I call them as they are. And the third umpire, who has been calling balls and strikes for about 25 years, I guess you could say he's an old pro. He looks at the other 2, shrugs his shoulder and says to them, they are what I call them.
Very good.
So we see what we know. That's why Shakespeare says there's nothing either good or bad. Just thinking makes it so.
Right.
And Epictetus, first century philosopher, says, it's not what's out in front of us in the world that causes us pain. It's what we think about it.
Absolutely. It's the way we perceive it through our conceptions.
Yes.
Yeah. And you talked about in the book about saying goodbye to these old unhelpful habits and getting ready for a new perspective, and that it doesn't involve our intellectual knowledge, that our conscience is the only way to unlock the superconscious wisdom. And that is a power to transform the negative emotions into creative and rewarding solutions. So we need to kind of skillfully manage our mind. And you talked about how yoga science uses the 3 Sanskrit words to describe our essential nature, that which we want to nourish and bring into the world, as Sat, Chit, and Ananda. And I think it'd be great if you could explain those to us.
Certainly. Sat means eternal. Chit is consciousness. Anand is bliss and fullness. This is our essential nature. This is what Christians refer to as the Christ, and Muslims refer to as Allah. So at a certain point of a spiritual journey, we realize that even though we have a body, we are not the body, because the body is subject to change. So how can I be something that is constantly changing? That would beg the question, am I this body today, or am I the body that I had when I was 5 years of age? And so I realize now I have a body, but I'm not the body. And yet I have a lifetime relationship with the body. I have to take care of the body. I have to parent the body. I have to make sound decisions regarding the health, the flexibility, and sustainability of the body. Well, some people say, oh, well, I'm my mind, I'm my thoughts, I'm my desires, I'm my emotions and concepts. But they all change also. They're all works in progress.
Right.
So both the body and the mind are really processes. They're not things, and they're certainly not me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when somebody cuts me off in traffic and an unconscious force comes into my conscious mind and I'm aware of anger, what do we usually say? Oh, I'm angry.
Mm.
Well, that's an oxymoron. That's not possible. It's not possible for me to be an emotion.
Right.
I have a relationship with anger,
Mm-hmm.
which means I have to do something when it comes into my conscious mind. I either have to serve it or sacrifice it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I am not the anger.
Mm.
And so, well, then who am I? And from where have I come?
Mm.
And why am I here? And what's to be done?
Yeah.
And where will I go when the body is no more?
Mm.
And so these ancient women and men, just like us, who, instead of watching TV, which there was no TV back then,
Mm-hmm.
they began to meditate. They began to go inside. They undertook this journey without movement, to go within, to seek within, and to find within. And many of them discovered that they are really citizens of two worlds, just as each of us are. We are citizens of two worlds. We are essentially spirit. Sat, Chit, Anand. Eternal, consciousness, wisdom, bliss, and fullness. Having a human experience in time and space with them through a mind, body, sense complex. We're citizens of two worlds. And in every relationship, our challenge and our work is to unite those two worlds. Inner, of consciousness and wisdom, and outer, of action. Right now, we're all about action.
Yes.
Without going within for the wisdom to know how to act in the world. The key is to create a bridge between these two worlds in our life. Make that part, an integral part of our philosophy of life, where if I have a relationship that requires an action that will bring about a consequence, I want to first and foremost go within, counsel within to the conscience, which can reflect perfect wisdom from the superconscious portion of the mind. That way there, when I go out into the world, I will know the thoughts to think, the words to speak, and the actions to take. That will not only benefit me, but the people and the organizations that I have relationships with, as well as the entire universe.
Yes, beautifully put. And you talked about the power of attention and how our destiny is not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. And you go on the book to say that our destiny depends on our ability to discover, manage, and honor the tremendous power of our minds. And this is what you talk about, going inward first and having a relationship with our inner world, because we're too much focused on the outer world, as you just mentioned.
Yes. Yes, if we constantly rely just on the outer world, we're always going to experience pain because we're not being guided by the best wisdom, and we're not going to know how to recalculate and make a mid-course correction at the appropriate time so that we don't wind up in pain.
Yeah. And can you talk to us, Leonard, about the two kinds of thoughts that you mentioned in the book and determining these two kinds of thoughts, Preya and Shreya, please?
Sure. There are two forms of thoughts, and thoughts are extremely important. They're energy. Thoughts are energy. And Preyas are some form of ego or sense gratification that conflicts with the superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience. So there might be an initial rush of pleasure. but it always ends in some form of dis-ease, dissatisfaction, and or pain.
Right.
Those are prayas.
Mm-hmm.
Could be anger, could be fear, could be a jelly donut.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. And if the truth be known, human beings are addicted to prayas.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're really the ground upon which the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind make their determination.
Right. Short-term gratification.
Short-term gratification, not the long view of where this is headed, where I am headed by serving it.
Right.
What it's going to mean to the body in a year or 5 years or 10 years, or the mind in a year or 5 years or 10 years.
Right. Or Mother Earth.
Or Mother Earth, as we can see today, who's in tremendous pain. Our own mother.
Yeah.
So there is another option, and those are the Shreyas. The Shreyas are not so comfortable, not so familiar, not so attractive initially, but Shreyas will always lead us for our highest and greatest good. So the ideal is to serve the Shreya with every thought, every word, every deed. And the promise is we'll be able to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, without misery, and without bondage.
Right. We'll be able to tap into that essential nature.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so I think the next question is, how do we begin the journey of purifying our consciousness so we can tap into the subtle voice of that inner wisdom and be able to decipher these thoughts that are Shreyas?
We do that in the midst of relationships. We do that in the midst of relationships. Every relationship requires an action. That's one of the definitions of a relationship. And every action that we take in a relationship always brings about a consequence. This is what is known as the law of karma. Yeah. This is what Newton interpreted as his statement, the third law of motion, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so when we have relationships with a preya, if I am driving to work and I'm being cut off in traffic by someone who is going 90 miles an hour and I have to slam on the brake to avoid an accident, I immediately have a relationship with anger. Because that anger, because of that relationship, has come forward from the unconscious mind into my conscious mind. And now at this point in space and time have a conscious relationship with anger. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to act with it? How am I going to dance with it? If I give it more and more attention, if I think about it, if I speak about it, and if I act in service to the anger, I'm going to be first and foremost poisoning my entire body and mind. And the more anger I have a relationship with and I react in that way in a habitual context, I'm going to be sicker and sicker. But what do we know about these prayas? I mentioned a few moments ago that all these thoughts are energy packages. Yeah. The prayas are always going to lead us for our highest and greatest good. But these prayas, these are ego or sense gratifications that we seem to be habituated or addicted to. But I'm here to tell you that they're not bad. They are energy, no doubt, and they are contractive energy, definitely, and they're debilitating, often poisonous. That's all true. But what did we learn in about the 4th or 5th grade about energy? We learned that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but it can be transformed. Ice can be transformed into water.
Right.
Water can be transformed into gas or steam. Well, why not anger? Why not fear? Why not greed? If it's energy, we should be able to transform it. Don't you know, we can. So when I have a relationship with anger, for example, or fear or greed, and there's nothing wrong with having these thoughts,
right?
What am I going to do with it? That's the question. So now what I do is I immediately know that I have to create a space between me and the stimulus of anger. What does that do? Increases the space. What is that? By increasing the space between stimulus and response, how does that benefit me? Well, in that space between stimulus and response, I gain freedom of choice. I have freedom of choice. So in that space that I've created, by slowing down and just detaching myself from this anger just for a moment, to look at it from the far side of the moon, so to speak, from a higher perspective, I can see its debilitating energy. I can see it now, and in that space, I can check with my conscience, and the conscience says, yes, it's a praya, not to be served because it's just going to poison you. Over time, it could kill you. It could cause a heart attack. It could cause high blood pressure. Not a pretty picture. But I learned in 5th grade, energy can be transformed. How am I going to transform this debilitating and contractive power of anger? And the answer lies in one word: sacrifice. 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 Comes from the Latin, sacrifici. Went into the Italian, sacrifici. Make it sacred. It's sacred. And the way to make these prayas, these ego or sense gratifications, sacred, even though they conflict with my inner wisdom, if I take that anger and instead of serve it in mind, action, and speech, I sacrifice it back to the origin from which it has come. Well, what is the origin from which it has come? Well, there is only one origin of all. We know it as G-O-D. Everything has come from G-O-D, no matter what name you give it.
Right.
G-O-D has manifested everything, including prayas. And this relationship has come to me in traffic so that I would experience anger, so that I would experience the opportunity to self-examine, recognize this unconscious praya, and offer it back to the origin from which it came. And because my outer action reflected my inner wisdom, the inner wisdom of the conscience, and this super conscious wisdom, because my outer action reflected that inner wisdom, that contractive form of energy is automatically transformed. Strategic reserves of a healing energy, an increase in my willpower, and an expansion of my creative capacity in the world. And I own that. I own that energy now, that positive creative energy and willpower. And I can use it at any time in any relationship. But if I serve the praya in conflict with the wisdom reflected by the conscience, if I serve it instead of sacrifice it, then I will debit my energy, I will reduce my willpower, and I will bankrupt my creative capacity. It works both ways. It's just like banking. You can either deposit this creative energy or you can withdraw it.
So say every trial and tribulation you have, or every energy you're experiencing that's not serving you, is a learning moment. So it's more like looking at it, what can I learn from this? And then offering it back.
No question about it. No question. And in the process, we're simply asked to experiment, get out of our comfort zone and experiment. Right. I'll tell you, Colette, I never ask anybody to believe anything that I'm saying. I tell people, doubt. You should doubt. It's healthy to doubt. Be a doubting Thomas. But also, if you're interested and curious, then be a scientist.
Right.
And experiment with what you're hearing and learning. Experiment within the constellationship of every relationship that you have. Experiment and see what you experience.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned curiosity there. And I think that's a great way to navigate your life, to be curious about these trials and tribulations, or these energies that you're feeling that are not serving you, to be curious about them and to see what you can learn in those. And it's necessary to have that discomfort in the moment in order to break through and to have it be a learning experience.
You know, that discomfort is a messenger.
Yeah.
I believe that discomfort, it's the only way to break through and wake us up a little bit.
Absolutely. We've seen it the past year and a half, right? Is that this discomfort, Mother Earth has given us a lot of discomfort. That's
right. So what option do we have?
Right.
We can complain. We can be angry.
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to poison me.
Yeah.
What good is that?
Yeah.
Or I can examine what I've been doing and exactly how valuable is it what I've been doing? Has it helped? Am I happier today than yesterday? Are things more creative? Do I have more willpower to do what's to be done and not do what's not to be done? Or is it time to make a mid-course correction?
Yeah.
You know, if I'm driving to a meeting and I've never been to this address before, now I have the technology of what they call GPS, this guidance system through satellites, and I can put in the address, and as the car drives, there's a voice, a computer-driven voice that gives me directions to take a left here, take a right here, go straight ahead here. And if I should make an unconscious wrong turn, what does the GPS guidance system say to me? Recalculating.
Yes.
Recalculating. That's what we need to be able to do, and we can do it. And go to school on this pain. Don't just define it based on faulty concepts and say, oh, that's bad, let's eliminate it.
Yeah.
No, there's a lesson here. There's a gift here.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So true. So true. And being able to, you know, it's all too easy for us nowadays in this busy world to distract ourselves from this pain or this discomfort. But it really is in that discomfort that the true learning comes. That's
right. And our culture is really good at distracting us.
Yes.
In fact, there are elements in the culture that we live in that want us to be distracted.
Yeah.
So if I am really stressed and distractible, chances are better than not that I will buy something
yes.
to provide me the illusion that I'm on vacation, or I might go on a vacation, or I might buy myself a new pair of shoes or a new cell phone, or a big fancy meal.
Yes.
Or a bottle of liquor. You see.
Yeah.
But my experience is every vacation is ultimately over, and then you got to come back to the pain.
Yes, exactly. Now, you did mention in the book, I thought, which was very helpful, Leonard, about an outline that you gave to help us undertake the process of tapping into the wisdom when we're faced with the choice that is more difficult. The first one was be focused in the moment.
Yes, that's true. Well, these are great tools brought to us through meditation. Mm-hmm. Because in meditation, we learn to focus our mind toward one point. And one-pointed attention is the key to genius and creativity. Absolutely. Because it makes us open to the wisdom, the superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience. So in meditation, and that's why meditation is so important, even if it's just 60 seconds a day or twice a day, as long as it's regular, I'm learning one-pointed attention, not multitasking. The culture wants us to multitask, but that's impossible. It's impossible. In order to provide the delusion that we're multitasking, what has to happen? Adrenaline has to surge through our entire body, allowing the mind to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth very quickly between two objects. Mm-hmm. So I can tell my boss I can multitask. And in the process, what happens to me? My immune system is depressed because of all that adrenaline and poison. My mind is depressed. I'm depressed. Mm-hmm. And I catch colds very quickly. I'm very susceptible to any bug. So it makes life miserable. But one-pointed attention, all of a sudden, automatically creates detachment, a space between stimulus and response. And in that space is my freedom to choose. And I choose to listen to the wisdom of the conscience, reflecting superconscious wisdom. So in meditation, I gain one-pointed attention. Yeah. I also gain wisdom and detachment. I also am more creative. Yes. And I'm constantly building the muscles of willpower to do what's to be done and not do what's not to be done.
Yeah, so I'm like making those quiet moments so you can hear that subtle voice of the superconscious wisdom, because we're so, again, distracted.
That's right. Yeah. So what I do is I have a meeting. I send an invitation out to the ego, the senses, the unconscious mind, and the conscience whenever I have a decision to make. Mm-hmm. And we all sit around the kitchen table. Mm-hmm. And let's say, for example, we just finished dinner. Mm-hmm. And the question comes up, are we going to brush our teeth? So we're all seated around the kitchen table. And the question before the group is, are we going to brush our teeth or are we not going to brush our teeth? Mm-hmm. And I sort of play the parent. I'm the moderator, the parent here. So I call on the ego. What is your opinion, dear ego? Should we brush our teeth or should we not brush our teeth? And what does the ego say? It's a very unpleasant experience. I'm against it. Okay, well, thank you very much, ego. Thank you for sharing your perspective. Mm-hmm. Senses, what's your perspective? Well, if the truth be known, I had a wonderful dinner. It was delicious. And especially the dessert. I really like that apple pie. It's my favorite. And so right now, I don't want to brush the teeth. I'd prefer to have a second slice of apple pie, say senses. Okay, well, thank you, senses. Thank you for your sharing. And now we'll go to the unconscious mind. What's your opinion about brushing the teeth or not brushing the teeth? And the unconscious mind might say, I vote with the ego and the senses. We vote a lot together. We're sort of a voting bloc. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much. Now I'm going to ask you, all three of you, ego, senses, and unconscious mind, to sit quietly, and I'm going to call on the conscience. And the conscience, in that quiet atmosphere will be able to reflect superconscious wisdom and then share what it has heard. Conscience, please share. And the conscience might say something like, well, I'm pretty sure everybody realizes that this life that we're living is not a sprint. It's more like a marathon, a long marathon. And for a long marathon, we need healthy teeth and strong teeth. And we need healthy gums and strong gums. And we need a healthy and strong immune system. And just by taking a time out to experiment with a 2-minute brushing of the teeth experiment, we will benefit the teeth, we will benefit the gums, and we will benefit the immune system. So let's all go together in accord into the bathroom for 2 minutes and brush the teeth. So there might be a little grumbling, but everybody goes in because it's a relatively easy experiment. And we brush the teeth. We come back to the kitchen table again afterward, and we have a summary. And again, I'm still playing the role of the parent and the moderator. So I say to the ego, okay, how was that experience for you? And the ego says, well, to be very honest, it wasn't as bad as I had feared. Because what I feared was by changing a habit, I would be annihilated.
Right.
I would be no more. But here I am. And it wasn't so bad. So that's my experience. Thank you, I said. And senses, how about you? Well, I too thought that it would not be appropriate. But, when the tongue glides over my teeth now, I don't feel that icky, mossy feeling. And I don't like that mossy feeling on my teeth at all. So it was a rather pleasant experience, and it wasn't a major expenditure of time. Well, thank you, senses and unconscious mind. What do you say? It wasn't so bad. Wasn't so bad. Okay, so what have I just done? I've done an experiment. It was relatively easy, sort of a no-brainer. We just finished dinner. We took a time out for 2 minutes, and the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind that were against it to begin with had pleasant experiences. And all three of them now trust me more than they did before the experiment.
Right.
So now I have a beachhead. I've established a new kind of relationship with my ego, senses, and unconscious mind that left a memory of pleasure. And so what that means is their limited perspective, ever so slightly, is now expanded of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I just build on that multiple times with seemingly insignificant no-brainers.
Very interesting. So when you're making choices, you look at you recognize the different functions of the mind, be it the senses, the ego, the unconscious, and then listen to the voice of the conscious.
Yes.
Yeah. Very interesting to decipher those functions.
Yes, that's coordinating the 4 functions of the mind, which is critically important in positive, helpful, and healthy choices.
Yes. And then you just said, repeat this with every choice. Even the simple choices, like you said, brushing your teeth.
That's right. And, if I'm watching TV at 10 o'clock at night and a coffee commercial comes on and the ego, senses, and unconscious mind start talking about going into the kitchen to have a cup of coffee and maybe some sugar and maybe some half and half and maybe another piece of apple pie from dinner, the conscience might have an entirely different view at 10 o'clock at night because the caffeine, the conscience might say, is going to keep us all up. Right, and we have a very important business meeting tomorrow. If you want to have a conversation about coffee, let's have it in the morning and maybe I'll have a different opinion.
Yes. Yes. Very, very good. Very good way at looking at those choices and looking at the different functions of the mind and being able to decipher what is showing up when you're making these decisions. And again, just with curiosity, without judging or any blaming. Very good. So much to talk about, Leonard, but I do want to finish up by talking about the tool that you give us, which is the bridge of yoga. And that the science of yoga provides the bridge, which, as you say in the book, is a reliable blueprint for building a trustworthy bridge to your inner wisdom. Can you talk to us as we finish up a little bit about this, please?
Well, the bridge of yoga, and remember, yoga means union. You can call it anything. You could call it the bridge of Christianity, the bridge of Islam, the bridge of Judaism, the bridge of Buddhism. Doesn't really matter. The point is, we're citizens of two worlds, essentially spirit having a human experience. And to fulfill the purpose of life, we must unite the two worlds, inner and outer. This bridge is a philosophical and a scientific bridge that encourages us in every relationship to base our outer action on our inner wisdom. And the more that we can use this bridge, build this philosophical and scientific bridge in our own lives, and maintain it, and use it in every relationship, knowing that the action that I ultimately take must have the good housekeeping seal of approval of my conscience. And the more that I can do that, base my outer action on my inner wisdom, I'm guaranteed to always be led for my highest and greatest good.
Beautiful. Well, Leonard, as I said, I could talk to you for a lot longer. This hour has flown by, but I do think, I highly recommend this book. Again, for those listeners, it's called Your Conscience, The Key to Unlock Limitless Wisdom and Creativity and Solve All of Life's Challenges. I think it's a wonderful book for your bedside table. It's a small book, right, Leonard?
Yes, only 144 pages.
Yeah, which is great. So I think it's something that you can pick up regularly from your bedside table as a reminder. I know myself, I need those reminders a lot.
Yes, well, we all do. All human beings do, because we all have something in common, and that is that we are prone to forgetting.
Yes.
That's all part of the game that we're playing.
Yeah.
We forget. Okay, all right, well, let's just accept that and work around it.
Right. Exactly. And this is where those daily habits are so important. What we do day in, day out becomes our life. And we talk about that a lot in Ayurveda, how those daily self-care practices and those daily habits really help support this way of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, Ayurveda was the first science that led me to yoga science. Because it was so practical.
Yes.
And I had a need to get beyond the pain caused by the standard American diet.
Right. So that's where your journey began.
Yes, it began with Ayurveda.
Very good. Well, the beautiful sister sciences of Ayurveda and yoga are really here to help us. And like I said, we need them now more than ever. So I highly recommend checking out Leonard's book. I found it really fantastic, and it will certainly be one that I will keep on my nightstand and go back to again and again as reminders. Leonard, please tell people where they can go to find out more about you, to get your book and your offerings, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that opportunity.
Of course.
We have two websites, one for the book, and that's yourconscience.org, yourconscience.org. And that'll tell you about the book and how to order the book. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it everywhere, all fine booksellers, yourconscience.org. And then I teach through the institution that I founded in 1996, the American Meditation Institute. Here's where I have my classes and my lectures and my distance learning. And so we would invite you to go to that website, which is AmericanMeditation.org, AmericanMeditation.org. And we have a free guided meditation and conversation, just like you and I have had here today, Colette, every Sunday from 9:30 in the morning till 11 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Time in the United States, Eastern Time. And it's free, and there's a link right on the homepage of AmericanMeditation.org.
Wonderful. That's a great offering.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Leonard, I really enjoyed our conversation today, and I appreciate the work you're doing in the world and putting out this wonderful book. This is what people need today. We need guidance to navigate these challenging times, and this book certainly helps us with that. So thank you so much again for all the work you're doing and for making time for this conversation today. I appreciate you.
And I deeply appreciate the invitation and the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. Take good care of yourself, and I hope to talk to you again sometime.
Good deal. Thank you.
Take care for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Leonard Perlmutter, and please check out the links in the show notes for the book. It's yourconscience.org, and the website to the American Meditation Institute is americanmeditation.org. I mentioned a moment ago about the importance of daily self-care practices, or dinacharya as they're called in Ayurveda. If you would like support around implementing and understanding the importance of these daily self-care practices, please check out my online 28-day self-paced course called Daily Habits for Holistic Health. You will find the link in the show notes, or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and you'll find that course under programs. On my website, you'll also find the link for online consultations and my Digestive Reset Cleanse, which you can do privately at any time throughout the year. If you would like to chat before booking anything, you can book a free 15-minute Services Enquiry Call there also. If you think that this episode will be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them so we can spread this special wisdom of Ayurveda and yoga. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you would like to leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast, I would really appreciate that. Don't forget, I have that private online community where we continue the conversation after the episodes, and you'll find that link in the show notes also. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.